Okay. Good morning, everyone. I don't know if everybody got a chance to read the abstract, but the title, I'm sure, is a little interesting or confusing to people. I'll try to give you some explanation there. But what I really wanted to talk about today, based on my 30 years of experience, is really some very simple practices that I have personally seen transform organizations that really have nothing to do with the life cycle model that you're using or the domain that you happen to live in, or even your organizational structure that much. And so, most organizations probably have something like these practices, and they can certainly live without them. Some of them do, but my point is that you shouldn't, and you should be looking at your execution of these 5 best practices. So this is a very meat and potatoes type of presentation. There's nothing earth-shattering here. But I wanted to start out by what it's not, because it's not about a lot of the popular topics that you may be dialing into with CAI during this webinar series. It's not about Agile, although I am going to refer to Agile a few times, because there are some of these practices that definitely Agile, I think, can even make things a little bit better, or maybe in some cases worse. So I'll be talking about that. That is not about CM. It's not about, great things like automated software testing, all good things, again, that you probably hear and can get information on from CAI on this webinar series. But these are really givens, I guess. They're the cost of entry for performing in your organization. They're not really differentiators. They can be, but they're not in the same ilk as what I'm going to be talking about. And because a lot of them are dependent on domain and customer, it's difficult to cover them in a short webinar like this. So what I am going to talk about, what it is, so I'm having trouble, Jessica. Hitting the moving. Do I have to?
Yes, you try clicking on the slides just one time and your space bar should work. And there's also the tiny arrow keys above.
Go. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, guys. So what it is, let me talk about what it is. And agnostic maybe is a slight misuse of the term, which I'm famous for doing. These are independent of model, customer, industry, product domain, et cetera. I say they're optional because, again, these practices, you can live without them, but you really shouldn't. They are, conversely, they're very hard to implement right? And what I'm trying to get into the meat of here in the presentation is about good execution for each of these, and not letting the typical lethargy and entropy that sets in, right? Most, I think, anybody who's got processes or a way of doing things experience this gradual, decline, this gradual drift away from good practice. And so I would encourage you, as we go through here, you're probably, you say, we do that pretty well, to be assessing, right, the practices in terms of whether you really have good execution in these or not. And, of course, they are culture shifting. It's interesting how some of these practices I've experienced anyway can really literally change the dynamics of a company and the company's culture. And again, they are differentiators. We're going to discuss both how these 5 practices I've seen anyway, change a culture, and also change results. So let's get into that. The topics are, and I think I published this in the abstract, program or project management reviews, monthly reviews, project reviews, whatever you might call them, true resource management, role and competency policies, which may not be obvious, and I'll explain, estimates that are based on, historical performance details from your organization, and proactive supplier management. So we'll get into each one of those, starting with program management reviews. So what do I mean when I'm talking about program management reviews? I've got, a dashboard and and a meeting. It's certainly, usually it needs to be an internal forum, not something necessarily with customers, but an internal forum for the project team to communicate, and it's often held maybe monthly, to communicate project status to executives and other internal stakeholders. And typically the way it works is each project manager gives a short presentation of his or her status in front of the sometimes peers, which is a good practice, executive management, maybe functional management, and there is usually some set expectation or standards that exist for what's going to be covered, and what should be, and maybe rules of the road for what should be discussed and what shouldn't be discussed. And so the way what's often not clear in this, and the reason why I used RACI here to talk about this, is really what is the purpose of the review. And again, I think this is one thing where entropy sets in and things drift with what the original intent was. But what is the purpose of the review? And really the most important thing is what's everyone's role, because this is where I see a decline in the benefits of this, and actually sometimes a detrimental use of these meetings. They become a horror rather than a benefit to the organization. And so, just generally, right, the program manager in these still has responsibility for the project. They have responsibility for the outcomes of the project. However, when we think about the RACI and we think about accountability, the idea with accountability is that it probably is different for different situations. That escalation of things that happen on projects is a part of life, and it should be built in and be a place where accountability is clear with the people sitting around the table. So things like resource needs, certain risks or issues, maybe dependencies that are often outside the control of the PM. If these things are clear and management is accountable for helping the project, that this is the forum for that, of course. And then, the RACI is a great tool for clarifying, particularly in meetings like this that can so go awry. What are we really talking about here, and what kind of consulting role do the people around the table play, and when should they be, providing consulting, and when shouldn't they be? When is it? When it's needed, right? When it's asked for, when it's elicited, then it should be provided, but maybe not otherwise. And then, of course, from an information standpoint, what kind of information needs to be conveyed? Is it clear? Is it objective? Is it truthful? We'll talk more about that because that's a key point. Now, it's timeless, of course. Dilbert, in his timeless way, is always perfect, right, for helping us make a point about the way it often is. What I've seen, and I love when I'm coming in to consult, particularly doing some initial baseline assessments of an organization, to get to sit in on these project management reviews. I always ask to do that because it gives a lot of insight, not only into, of course, the programs and the types of things going on, but into the culture. So what do you see? What is often the case? And I hope none of you actually experience this, but many times what you see is a very demoralizing management culture where micromanagement and yelling and blaming and storming and things like that happen in these meetings. Or maybe the opposite is sometimes it's very, I say, pro forma. It's, the practice is done, everybody files in, it's a check the box, you're satisfying the minimum requirements, but there's not much value, it seems like. And, of course, everybody's, multitasking and texting and et cetera, not paying much attention. It's a low priority in a lot of organizations. People come if they have nothing else to do, honestly. It's poorly attended. It's sometimes just a briefing. It's a one-way conversation. PM gets up, and everybody, again, is kind of multitasking. It's something I've spent coaching managers a lot on, and I do